And we are back in the next section. In this section, I'm going to talk more about the detailing of the scene and our character animation. And we're basically going to explore a different side to procedural design, I guess. In the previous section, we were talking about and exploring geometry nodes, how we can manipulate geometry using geometry nodes, how we can generate particles with geometry nodes. And we did touch a little bit about procedural material in the previous chapter. But specifically in this section, we're going to talk more about things that are actually going to be in the scene at the moment. And that includes, checking out the animation data and see how we can manage different animation data, how we can store different animation data for our character, which is also applicable for literally every other thing that you can animate in Blender. Another thing that we're going to talk about in this section is, figuring out subtle details that we would usually get from photographs, but we do not tend to get it from 3D renders by default. So we're going to explore that as well. And that includes lighting to improve the composition. We're going to try to make volumetric lights. We're going to explore some tips and tricks about making volumetric lights even lighter and more performant on our machines, as well as procedural material design in the shader editor. So, first and foremost, in this chapter, I want to touch a little bit on the animation of our character here. I kind of have to came up with a name for this character because it feels too mouthful saying the character every single time. So I just call her Nina. So Nina here is a character that I've made with a friend specifically for this class, because I want to have a character that is performing quite well, even on lower spec computers, but also still look pretty interesting and still look like something that I would personally use in my own artwork. As you know, if you've been browsing my Instagram or my portfolio over there, you might have seen that I do a lot of renders with human subjects. So it just makes sense for me personally. We do have statistics turned on. So this character here have some pre-made animation included. I'm just gonna turn on the katana for a second here. I think the performance is it's a little on the heavier side right now. It's less than 12 FPS. If this is a video game, this is unplayable. So we're gonna go over here on the render settings, and we're gonna try to reduce the subdivision. So subdivision is essentially, let me just remove the limit there, put it on 4. 4 subdivisions, very large. Subdivision, if you're not familiar with, so essentially what subdivision does is that, say if you have this mesh right here, this object, this shoe, it is quite low polygon if you think about it. Like, you can see the individual faces, the lines and everything. This is generally quite lightweight to load. It almost has that retro video game aesthetics to it, but by design, it is made so that we can have a very performant viewport while not sacrificing quality for our final render. So this is how the mesh is going to look like in the final render. It's going to look closer to this than this. So that's subdivision. And these models specifically is designed for one level of subdivision. We can always turn it up, crank it up to 2, but we may not see, much improvement. If anything, some of the parts might not look as intended. Okay. So I would just leave it at 1. And some other parts of this character, some other parts of Nina has subdivision as well, like the main body part over here. So without subdivision, of course, we can see the edges, the rough and jagged edges of her polygon. But with subdivision on, it's going to be a lot smoother and hopefully a lot more lifelike. I mean, in my design, she's wearing kind of like a plug suit, kind of like a skin suit, if you will. So it's not like a traditional character with like a lot of cloth and outfit, which is kind of a bit of a deliberate choice as well to keep her polygon, to keep the poly low. So yeah, to keep this viewport session more performant and hopefully we can hit higher FPS there. We're just gonna go over to the render properties and go to simplify, and we can just set the max subdivision to 0. This means, hey, disable all subdivision in the scene. And with subdivision, we reached around 367,000 triangles, and without subdivision, it's barely 200,000. And as we can see, our FPS have returned to our intended frame rate, that is 24 frames per second. So this is pretty cool. Now we can see the character is animated. I want to move into her own blend file and leave this for a little bit because right now she is actually in the scene, right? So we could always do stuff in here, but I want to go back to her blend file for a second and just kind of give an overview of her features. I believe it's in the MDL Nina base char version 8, and we can open. It's probably going to take a little bit to load because of the subdivision settings. And yeah, that is right. This is using subdivision. So let's disable it again here. And I want to reduce the final render subdivision to there. And let's reduce the texture limit to, let's run with 1K for the viewport. So it loads faster. And I can always save this and move on. And I want to switch this from from studio lighting to matte cap. Sometimes I prefer matte cap a little more. This is kind of a preference thing, so feel free to change the view as you see fit. Whatever floats your boat. I'm just gonna lower the opacity on the wireframe a bit. Okay, so this character has animation. Nina has animation on her. As you can see, I already have some effects going on there, but we will cross that bridge when we have to later. So I'm just going to disable it for now. It's going to be fun. We're going to be building these sort of stuff as well. So let me just turn off the modifier in her hair right there. Which one of you? I think this one. There we go. Okay, yeah, I made the hair static for now. Same thing with her jacket. Yeah, so she has this katana, she has this control rig, and this is pretty much her rig. If I want to show her full bones, I can do so in here by showing the bone layers. Hold on, it might not be so easy to see because we need to viewport display, keep everything in front. Secondary, let's see if I can turn it on. I'm not sure why I can't turn this on. It's probably because there's bone layer settings. I'm not exactly sure. Again, this is more like a procedural effects class, so I will not be getting into this too far. But we're gonna stick to the essential knowledge for now. So if I select all the bones that we can see, and I can move between modes. So you remember with objects like a mesh like this. So for instance, like the blade of her sword here, and we press tab, we get into edit mode. And if we press control tab, we get to see this kind of like a cursor menu, and we can move between modes. And most of the time we use object mode, right, to move things around. I want to check out the bone, and if I press edit, it's gonna show me the internal bone. This is what I was trying to show earlier, but this is her internal bone that we will not be touching at all. In a more conventional setup, animators would actually animate using these bones directly, but the way I made this character with a friend of mine who sculpt and rig many parts of this character, especially rigging, because I am just really not that good at rigging. he basically set up an IK rig. And what IK does is essentially an invert kinematics. It means if we want to animate or pose her in a certain way, we can just move these limbs without touching any of the other bones inside her body. So this keeps our setup and animation very very simple and very quick. And yeah, this is a very very fun way of working. This is so much better than working on the individual bones manually. And so we can see, I'm just going to turn off the auto keyframe over there. We can see that we have an action going on.